Okay, welcome back. We're on page 212. We just finished talking about how the area chart is really similar to a stack line chart. It shows the magnitude of change. There is a very cool thing on page 212. It's called the quick reference, that little guy at the bottom. And if you had a sharp eye, and you could probably look at that and go, there's an awful lot of test questions in that one little chart. Okay, so let's go through this. This is all about the philosophy. It's kind of a summary of when I should use one chart type versus another, which again is very much the kind of things I want you guys to learn. So, pie chart, let's start at the beginning. It shows the relationship of parts to the whole, like which has the largest share. Okay, I use pie charts when I'm trying to show you, what percent of your grade is going to be the final exam, as as an example. Relationship of parts to the whole. Line charts, they talk about showing the change in data. Not always, but a lot of times the x-axis is time. So we're showing changes over time. It doesn't have to be time, but it is a pretty good example. So, if the chart goes up or goes down, you can see trends, right? You can see something is increasing and something is decreasing. So that's changes in the data often over time. Column. Column is talking about comparing series, but vertical, right? And most likely not just data itself. It's probably going to be groups of data. Okay, that's probably kind of how it's going to work. A bar chart is exactly the same concept. It's still going to be comparing series, except it's just done horizontally. Now, a lot of people like the bar chart when the time is on the x-axis because it shows, progress, for example, like that Gantt chart we did. It shows progress as you're moving along the time axis. So that's a pretty good way of doing it. Or it could show growth or over time. Again, I'm using time as an example, but it's not required, okay? A scatter chart. Scatter charts are trying to talk about finding a correlation. Is there a correlation between age and temperature? And it could be that there is no correlation between age and temperature. So in the example that we gave, it looked like there was a modestly weak correlation. This is not a statistics course. I'm not going to explain how you determine that. But, just because you can go into Excel and put a trend line out there, doesn't mean there's a strong correlation going on. Area. Area is all about showing highlights and changes in categories. You're not necessarily talking about numbers. You're trying to talk about which categories have been changing more than others, as an example. They talk about a combination. So on page 213, they talk about making charts with multiple things in them. So I'm going to go down here to sales. And so I'm going to grab this entire doodad here. And we're going to start up. So I'm going to go here and insert a line chart. It's just a plain old line chart. Okay. This is kind of weird because I have a single axis, right? So profit is a number that starts probably around here, the 400 range to the 1600 range, and quantity never gets above 150. So this line's a little squatty, and this is kind of flump. So don't you think it'd be kind of cool if we could somehow separate these lines out and have two separate charts going on at the same time? And the way this works is one of the axes has to remain. Typically, it's going to be the x-axis. And you're going to create a second y-axis off on the right-hand side. You already have a combination of y-axis on the left-hand side, but that's not very good because what unit of measure would you put here? Is it dollars or is it just quantity? Right? Don't know. In fact, you can't tell. So we're going to separate those guys out. So I'm going to pick one of these. It doesn't really matter which one. I'm going to pick the red one. And you have to be very careful when you pick these guys because if you pick out here, you're going to get the background. You pick that, you're going to get the lines. I mean, you really got to have good mouse skills to click on exactly what you want. So in this case, I want to click on the red one. Then I'm going to right click. I'm going to go down here to format data. And one of the things is plot the series on a secondary label. Whew. Now it knows that's dollars. And now it knows that's just plain old numbers. So these are two charts on top of each other. They're essentially the same thing as producing a chart for the blue line and producing a chart for the red line and then just superimposing them on. That's essentially what it is. And this, of course, shows you some pretty cool stuff that, you know, the profit is doing pretty good, and, you know, we still made profit even when the quantities were down. You know, it's a lot of good stuff to this. Okay, so it should be fairly obvious when you do one of these suckers, you're probably going to end up with a minimum, if you're going to have a combo, you're probably going to have a minimum of 3 data series. You know, the label, some quantity in this case, and profit in the other. Now, that doesn't mean you can't go nuts and throw in an extra one. The problem here is, if there's a third one, it better have the same units as one of these, because I can really only have 2 legends on the y-axis. I can't really have 3. So you can have 3 data elements, but if the next one is numbers, you're, you know, great. If the next one is dollars, you're okay. But if the next one is date, you know, something that's not a number and not a time, not a dollar, that's just flat not going to work. Okay, so typically it's not done that way. Typically these combination things are just have 3 and only 3. You notice, of course, that for this thing to work, they have to share this x-axis. Kind of makes sense to me. Okay, they talk about chart layout. A lot of people have, you know, if you're trying to project this thing like on a projector in a dark, you know, conference room kind of thing, maybe this white background is just a bit much, huh? So they have this thing called layout, and you can go in here and pick kind of sort of what you want for a chart style. And here's some dark ones. I'm just going to throw a dark one in. I don't know, what the heck, okay? Now, in a corporate environment, this actually might be more pleasing. Kind of sort of up to you. Once again, in the 2013 version, you have the ink saver, which means that all the lines and stuff are just hashed rather than solid fills. We don't get that on the 2010, but that's beside the point. Okay, the next thing we're going to talk about is modifying data. Okay, so I've done something here, and I want to keep going. I want to add some more data. So let's just add a row right here to our guy. So I'm going to add a row here, and I'm going to say December. Dang, get my fingers on the keyboard here. And let's say we did, I don't know, 120 and 899. Okay, now when I added that, nothing changed in the chart, right? Because the chart doesn't know that we added a column. So how do I tell the guy that I want you now to include additional data that was not present when you created this thing? Well, basically you click on the chart, so we get the little highlight guys, and all you basically have to do is just grab these guys and drag them to include the new items. Ding! Did you see it change? Isn't that pretty cool? Now there is another way to do it. There's a manual way, and I kind of sort of like the manual way sometimes. I click on the design tab, and there's a thing called select data, and now I can actually see, you know, what is the series, and I have 2 series going on, a quantity series and a profit series. I have, you know, what shows up on the x-axis, the category axis, and you know, I can go in there and make some tweaks. So either way, dragging and dropping clearly works pretty doggone cool to add new items. Now, is this smart enough to figure out if I deleted one, what that will automatically do? What do you think? I mean, it wasn't smart if I added one at the end. What happens if I just go delete this row? Is it going to say, sure, no problem, boss? Exactly. It's going to say, well, you know, you used to have a range in there, and you deleted a row out of the middle of the range, so I don't have to go back and tell it anything weird. Okay. Inserting an object. Now, this is kind of weird. I don't know why the book goes into a great deal of detail on this, because it's kind of sort of simple. I'm going to grab this thing and make it a little bit larger physically, just so I can have a little more room to play with here. Okay, so I'm going to go here and I want to insert a picture or something. It's not that big a deal. Basically, you just click inside here and you say, okay, I'll do some clip art. And I'll grab this guy. So I'm going to go here and I'm going to say copy. And then basically go inside my chart here and say paste. And then now I can move this guy around, and You know, scoot him around, put him where I want him, and that kind of stuff. So again, this is not rocket surgery. I'm not sure why they spend a great deal of time talking about this. Some of the other things that you can insert a shape, for example, and the example they use is this kind of rounded corner. Like if you want to draw attention to something, I'm going to move this up here and say, I don't know, something. Gee whiz, something. Okay. So again, adding objects to a chart isn't all that complex. It's not that big of a deal. Okay, so let's continue. They talk about, on page 218, they talk about messing with the chart objects, you know, adding and changing the legend or the title or the grid lines and all the rest of this. And again, this is not complex. For example, if I wanted to go here and put an actual honest-to-God legend here, you know, a unit of measure here, some sort of a term on this x-axis, I could say format axis, and you know, you can go in here and change things and move things around. We kind of sort of did that. I'm gonna click on the chart area. Now, when you're clicking on the chart area is kind of weird because it's going to allow you to like change the background color, things like that, format the plot area. We're gonna go for, I don't know, some solid fill, whatever. Okay, something goofy. Now, clicking on the lines themselves gives you slightly different, because now you have format grid lines, and you could say, I want, you know, how you want the things to show, how thick they are, how big they are, blah, 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 blah. You can do all sorts of cool stuff with actual lines. Okay, so just kind of interesting things. One of the things I want to do here is I want to click and go to the design and talk about the chart title. For example, I don't really have a chart title, so let's just put one in there. And so I want a centered one, and you know, put whatever you want in there. Now, my chart title is a little too big now, so I'm going to grab the plot area and squash it down to give me a little bit of room. You know, grab this guy and type in whatever I want. You know, again, this is not rocket surgery. You can just kind of play around with this. So yes, you can change the title. Yes, you can change the legends. Yes, you can change the x-axis or the y-axis. Yes, you can change grid lines. You can have vertical grid lines and horizontal grid lines. Let's go back to the trend line thing. Now, if I click on this, remember how in the scatter plot, I went in here, I could say like add a trend line. And my choices are, and again, this is a lot of statistical stuff, so I'm just going to ignore all that and just say do it. And so what it did is it took the blue and said, this is what looks like the trend is. I'm going to go back to that survey guy, and I'm going to do this. I guess I'm going to do this guy over again. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to whack this. Oh, by the way, whacking, you know, just not that big of a deal, right? I just lit it up and hit the button. So I'm going to go back to here, and I'm going to do insert a scatter, just a plain old scatter. Ka-doing. I'm going to do what I did before. I'm going to click on this guy and say format axis and change this to 60 so I can actually see what's going on. Okay, cool. Now we're back to where we were. So I can click on the data itself, okay? I want to click on the data and go in here and say I want to add a trend line. And now I have some choices. The difference between exponential and linear in this case is going to be almost indistinguishable. I don't think you're going to be able to see the difference between that. And let me do that again and change it to, well, linear. Yeah, they're about the same in this particular case. In fact, they superimpose each other as far as I can tell. So anyway, adding trend lines is a way to draw attention to some data. Okay, this is a good place to stop for the 15-minute mark. We'll pick this thing up again in just a few.